The chandelier above glowed softly, scattering golden light across the velvet-lined dining hall of La Verite, San Francisco's most exclusive French-Japanese fusion restaurant. The tables were set with crystal stemware and plates edged in silver, each place setting an invitation to opulence and silent power. Guests spoke in measured tones, as though volume itself could betray them. At the far end of the room, a long table waited, where an unusual dinner was about to unfold. Ayaka Sato entered quietly, her presence drawing eyes though she seemed to walk like a shadow. Billionaire founder of Shinrai Technologies, she was known in Tokyo for her brilliance, but here in the United States, whispers often reduced her to stereotypes, reserved, hard to read, dependent on her translators. Tonight, she let her silence speak, gliding to her seat without acknowledging the speculative looks. Marcus Drayton adjusted his cufflinks, his grin sharp as a blade as he leaned toward his colleague, Philip Crane. Both men carried the confidence of executives who believed the world bent around their ambitions. They represented Valoric Biotech, a San Francisco-based giant eager to consume Ayaka's company for its advanced AI algorithms. To them, Shinrai was an exotic jewel waiting to be plucked. Marcus's eyes flickered to Ayaka, scanning her as though she were a puzzle piece that somehow didn't belong on this table. He nudged Philip under the table, whispering just loudly enough. "She doesn't even speak much English. This should be easy." Philip smirked, sipping his wine like the victor of a game already won. At the periphery of this performance, Keisha more balanced a tray with practiced ease. She had worked at La Verite for 2 years, invisible in her black and white uniform, yet always observing. Tonight, she recognized something in Ayaka's silence. A quiet dignity others mistook for weakness. Keisha had studied Japanese in college, partly out of curiosity, partly out of admiration for its culture of layered politeness and hidden strength. She had never expected the language to become useful in her restaurant job, but as she passed the long table and caught Ayaka's eyes, she felt the weight of unspoken things pressing on her chest. The translator seated beside Ayaka repeated words with professional detachment, rendering Marcus's and Philip's proposals into Japanese. The Valoric executives spoke with a casual dominance, layering compliments so thinly veiled they sounded like insults. "We admire your little company," Marcus said, dragging out the word little with mock fondness. "But global markets need serious leadership. That's where we come in." Ayaka listened without interruption, her fingers lightly resting on the stem of her glass. When she nodded, the translator responded for her, his voice too neutral, almost erasing the bite in her measured phrases. To the executives, it was confirmation of their assumption. She needed them more than they needed her. The waitstaff moved in rhythm, pouring wine, serving plates of delicately arranged uni and truffle risotto. Keisha delivered plates silently, yet her ears caught every word. She noticed how Marcus's tone sharpened whenever Ayaka didn't answer quickly. She noticed how Philip leaned back, eyes narrowed, as though he were already imagining signing ownership papers. Their arrogance irritated her, but it was the subtle laughter, mocking, dismissiveness that made her grip her tray tighter. She could see Ayaka understood far more than they thought. A faint tightening at the corner of her lips, a flicker in her eyes, revealed as much. But Ayaka said nothing, not yet. Marcus raised his glass for a toast, his voice booming. To partnerships that know their place. And to opportunities waiting to be unlocked. The room chuckled politely, though the insult slid across the table like a knife. Ayaka clinked her glass with perfect courtesy, her gaze unwavering, but Keisha caught the slight pause before she took a sip. It was the pause of someone enduring disrespect with patience sharper than anger. Keisha's chest tightened. She wanted to speak, to call out the mockery hidden in polished words, but she knew her place waitresses did not interrupt power dinners. As the first course faded, Marcus unfolded a folder with the revised contract. He tapped the document with theatrical importance. "We've simplified things for efficiency," he said. "This way, you can focus on innovation while we handle the heavy lifting." He slid it across the table toward Ayaka, whose translator began reading silently. The executives exchanged a smug glance, as though victory was inevitable. Keisha, pausing by the sideboard, glimpsed the papers. She couldn't see details, but she saw Ayaka's brows furrow, a crease of unease beneath her calm exterior. Her translator cleared his throat, hesitating slightly before explaining. Marcus's grin widened. He believed the hesitation meant confusion. Keisha, however, knew hesitation often meant deception. Ayaka finally spoke, her voice low and smooth, her Japanese carrying the weight of layered meaning. The translator, however, rendered it flat, stripped of nuance. She is honored by your offer, but wishes for clarification. The executives exchanged knowing smirks, interpreting her measured courtesy as submission. Clarification? Of course, Philip said, his tone dripping with condescension. Though perhaps we should keep things simple. Too much detail might be overwhelming. Marcus chuckled at that, the sound echoing like arrogance made audible. The words weren't just disrespect, they were dismissal, treating Ayaka not as an equal, but as a guest who should be grateful for scraps. Keisha felt her jaw tighten. The audacity of these men, mocking someone who had built empires while they hid behind their corporate machinery, ignited a fire inside her. But she stayed still, her tray against her hip, waiting. Ayaka's silence lengthened, a silence heavy enough to bend the air. Finally, she spoke again in Japanese, sharper this time, her tone clipped with restrained steel. The translator hesitated, his eyes darting to the executives before smoothing her words into something docile. She appreciates your patience, and will consider. Keisha's breath caught. That wasn't what Ayaka had said. She had caught fragments of phrases of isolation, of not being heard. The translator had erased them, making Ayaka smaller than she was. Marcus leaned back with a laugh, as though the deal were sealed. Wonderful. Then we'll move to signatures soon. Ayaka lifted her gaze, her eyes steady, but Keisha could see the flicker of frustration beneath her composure. No one else seemed to notice. To the room, Ayaka remained inscrutable, foreign, diminished. But Keisha understood enough Japanese to know. Ayaka had just revealed her wound, her loneliness, her frustration at being invisible, and it had been silenced. Something in Keisha's chest broke open. She knew she couldn't stay silent much longer. The restaurant's hum softened as dessert menus were offered, yet tension sharpened instead of easing. Marcus and Philip leaned close, speaking in half-whispers dripping with arrogance. She'll fold by morning, Marcus muttered. She has no idea what's buried in that clause. Philip smirked. She won't even see it until it's too late. Ayaka's translator didn't bother to repeat those words, assuming she couldn't follow. But Keisha heard, and her blood boiled. She glanced at Ayaka, saw her shoulders drawn tight, her hand unmoving on her wine glass. For the first time, Ayaka looked almost breakable, and that was when Keisha made a silent vow. The chandelier glowed brighter as though the room itself was waiting. The night stretched thin, every moment taut as a bowstring. Ayaka's eyes shifted briefly to Keisha, a glance so fleeting it might have been imagined, but it carried something unspoken recognition, maybe even a plea. Keisha's heart pounded in answer. She was only a waitress, invisible by design, but sometimes invisibility was its own kind of power. And as the men laughed again, dismissing what they did not understand, Keisha knew her silence was about to end. The air grew thicker, the room balancing between the clink of silverware and the brittle edge of arrogance. Marcus leaned in with his fork poised like a pointer, drawing invisible graphs over Ayaka Sato's future as though she were a footnote in his empire. Philip chuckled under his breath, the kind of laugh reserved for private jokes about other people's supposed weaknesses. Ayaka sat motionless, poised with a grace that came from years of battles fought in boardrooms where respect was always conditional. Her translator kept smoothing the sharpness from her words, turning them into bland courtesies, and the executives mistook that filtered politeness for surrender. Keisha more felt the moment press down on her chest. She had carried plates and trays through countless dinners, seen billionaires haggle over wine vintages and celebrities argue over truffle portions, but she had never seen a woman so powerful treated like she was disposable. She set down a carafe of water with hands that only just hid their tremor. Her ears caught every Japanese word Ayaka had uttered, and each mistranslation stung like a slap. What was being erased was not just language, but dignity. Keisha's pulse quickened. She knew she was about to cross a line that could cost her job, but something inside whispered, if not you, then who? Ayaka finally leaned forward, speaking in Japanese with measured precision. her words carrying both restraint and quiet ache. "No matter what I say, I am not heard," she said. But the translator glanced nervously at Marcus and Philip, then adjusted her sentence until it was nothing more than, "She thanks you for your patience." Keisha's heart lurched. The lie was too loud in her ears. The injustice burned too bright. She took a slow breath, feeling the weight of the chandelier's light on her shoulders, and before she could doubt herself, she spoke. Her voice was steady, soft but unshakable. "Sama Mason, Sato-sama," she said in fluent Japanese, her accent polished by years of study, her bow subtle but respectful. "On behalf of this room, I apologize for the disrespect you've endured. Your words are strong and clear. If you wish, I will assist you." The entire table froze. Marcus's fork clattered against his plate. Philip's smirk vanished. The translator blinked in disbelief. Ayaka's eyes widened just slightly, not in shock but in recognition, as though she had been waiting for this thread of truth to appear. Around them, the restaurant's quiet hum faltered, waitstaff pausing mid-step to glance their way. Keisha stood still, her uniform plain, her tray empty, yet her voice carried weight that shifted the air. Marcus recovered first, his laugh brittle. "What is this? Does the help have opinions?" He glanced at the maitre d', gesturing sharply. "Remove her." But Ayaka lifted her hand gently, her gaze locked on Keisha. For the first time that evening, she spoke in English, her voice lilting but firm. "She stays." Her words were simple, but the authority in them halted even the maitre d' mid-step. Keisha's chest tightened with relief. She bowed again, then turned her full attention to Ayaka. "The clause in their contract," she continued in Japanese, careful to phrase it with clarity, "is designed to strip Shinrai of ownership of its algorithms. They plan to claim exclusivity and block you from future consultation." Gasps rose from staff at nearby tables who understood fragments of what was unfolding. Marcus's smile cracked into fury. Philip tried to interrupt, but Ayaka raised her hand, silencing the room. Ayaka took the document, her eyes scanning with swift precision. She murmured softly, and Keisha translated word for word. "You seek not partnership, but conquest. You believe my silence is weakness. You have mistaken restraint for ignorance." Each phrase, sharp and deliberate, sliced through the veil of misunderstanding. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, his composure slipping. "This is outrageous," he barked. "She doesn't know what she's talking about. This girl, this waitress has no authority." But Ayaka turned to Keisha, her eyes steady, and said, "Authority lies in truth. Tonight, she has given it back to me." Keisha translated, her voice carrying the weight of Ayaka's conviction. The table had shifted. Power no longer rested in Valoric's polished suits, but in the alliance between two women society had underestimated. The billionaire who refused to be silenced and the waitress who dared to speak. Philip leaned forward, his desperation cracking through his smooth exterior. "Let's be reasonable. Misunderstandings happen in translation. The contract is fair," but Ayaka interrupted him in Japanese, her tone precise. "Fairness does not need to hide in the shadows." Keisha repeated it with unshakable calm, and the words hit the room like thunder. The tension escalated further when Ayaka reached into her bag and placed a slim device on the table. With one tap, a recording played Marcus and Philip's voices, unmistakable, discussing their strategy to deceive her. The words were damning. "She won't see it coming. We'll get her company quietly. By the time she realizes, Shinrai will belong to us." The recording ended with a cruel laugh. Silence fell so heavy that the chandelier's hum became audible. Keisha swallowed hard, glancing between them. Marcus went pale, Philip's hand trembled against his wineglass. The translator shifted uneasily, suddenly aware of the precariousness of his role. The room that once seemed to belong to Valoric now belonged wholly to Ayaka and Keisha. Ayaka's lips curved into the faintest smile, not triumphant, but resolute. She spoke once more in Japanese, her voice gentle yet firm. "Dignity cannot be stolen. It can only be surrendered, and I will not surrender." Keisha translated with pride, her voice carrying that truth across the room. Applause began softly from a corner. My Donovan, executive director of the North American Innovation Alliance, had been dining discreetly at a nearby table. He stood now, clapping with calm authority. "Remarkable," he said, his voice steady. Absolutely remarkable. All eyes turned to him, and he stepped closer, addressing the maitre d' before Marcus could speak again. If anyone thinks of dismissing this waitress, they will answer to me. His words struck like a gavel. Keisha's knees almost buckled with relief, but Ayaka's gaze steadied her. In that glance, Keisha understood. She had not just translated words, she had opened a door. The room buzzed with shock, anger, admiration. Marcus sputtered, Philip muttered threats, but it didn't matter anymore. The balance had shifted permanently, all because a waitress had chosen to speak Japanese in defense of a woman who had been underestimated. The dinner ended not with signatures, but with silence, broken pride, and the knowledge that Ayaka had allies they had never anticipated. As guests began to leave, Ayaka rose gracefully and addressed Keisha one final time that evening. In Japanese, she said, "From this moment, you are no longer invisible." Keisha bowed deeply, tears pressing at her eyes. She had no words, only the knowledge that her life had changed in a single act of courage. The morning after the dinner, San Francisco buzzed with whispers that spread faster than the fog rolling in from the bay. At first, it was only in hushed voices over coffee counters and hurried phone calls between boardrooms something had gone wrong at La Verite, something involving Valoric Biotech's prized executives and the Japanese billionaire, Ayaka Sato. By midday, whispers hardened into headlines. Recording reveals deception attempt in billion-dollar negotiation, the financial papers declared. Screens across the city flashed with Marcus Drayton's and Philip Crane's faces, their reputations now tethered to words they had spoken in arrogance. Inside her suite at the Mandarin Oriental, Ayaka sipped green tea by the window, the skyline gleaming in steel and glass around her. She was serene, her kimono draped casually over her shoulders, but her eyes burned with a calm fire. The recording had already been sent to trusted contacts, her strategy precise. She had not merely defended herself, she had dismantled a threat with the patience of a master tactician. On the low table before her lay two phones, one buzzing endlessly with reporters requesting comment, the other silent, reserved only for private matters. She ignored the noise and turned instead to the future. Keisha Moore stood nearby, her hands folded, still wearing the disbelief of someone who had stepped into a world she had never imagined entering. She had been up all night replaying the dinner in her mind, each word, each glance, each decision. Part of her still wondered if she had been reckless, if she had overstepped beyond repair. Yet Ayaka had insisted she come to the suite, had insisted she sit and share tea like a guest, not an employee. Keisha's uniform had been replaced with a borrowed dress of soft linen, simple but elegant. She still felt out of place, like a child in borrowed shoes, but Ayaka's presence made her feel seen. Ayaka turned toward her, speaking in Japanese before shifting into careful English. "You risked everything," she said softly. "For me." "What?" Keisha hesitated, her fingers twisting in her lap. "Because I saw them treating you like you were invisible. And I know that feeling. People look at me and see a uniform, not a person. I couldn't watch them do it to you." Her voice trembled, but held steady enough to carry the truth. Ayaka regarded her for a long moment, then smiled, small but radiant. Invisible people change the world. Only the blind fail to see them. She reached forward, taking Keisha's hand lightly, a gesture of gratitude that needed no translation. Keisha's chest tightened, her eyes stinging. No one had ever spoken to her like that, not as a worker, not as a token, but as a person of worth. By afternoon, Valoric Biotech issued a terse statement. Effective immediately, Marcus Drayton and Philip Crane have resigned from their positions. The market responded swiftly, shares dropping, investors demanding answers. Behind the scenes, the board scrambled to contain the fire, but the blaze spread. Trust, once lost, is rarely regained. Ayaka's decision to leak the recording at the precise moment ensured that every move Valoric made afterward was defensive. For once, they were not the hunters, but the hunted. Meanwhile, Ayaka's reputation soared. She was no longer the mysterious Japanese CEO hiding behind translators. She was the strategist who had turned an ambush into a reckoning. And at her side was Keisha, the waitress whose voice had shifted the balance of power. The story captured imaginations across cultures. News anchors marveled at the courage of a young black woman who had dared to speak truth in a room designed to silence her. Social media erupted with hashtags invisible no more, speak truth, hashtag Ayaka and Keisha. For every cynical remark about luck or coincidence, thousands more spoke of dignity, courage, and the need to listen to those who are too often unheard. It was during this storm that my Donovan reached out. The executive director of the North American Innovation Alliance arrived at Ayaka's suite with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to entering important rooms, but he bowed respectfully before speaking. "Ms. Sato," he said warmly, "what I witnessed last night was extraordinary. And Ms. Moore, your courage deserves not only recognition but opportunity." He paused, his gaze shifting to Keisha. "I would like to offer you a position on Shinrise Global. At Leadership Requires." Keisha's eyes widened, her throat tightening. She had imagined perhaps a thank you, perhaps even a letter of recommendation, but this was beyond imagination. I was just a waitress," she stammered. I shook his head gently. "You were never just anything. Titles don't define worth. Actions do." Ayaka nodded in agreement, her eyes gleaming with pride. The weeks that followed transformed everything. Keisha trained under Ayaka's direct mentorship, learning not only the intricacies of business strategy, but the subtle art of patience and timing. She traded trays for boardrooms, aprons for tailored suits. The transition was daunting. There were moments she stumbled, moments she doubted whether she belonged, but Ayaka never wavered in her support. Whenever Keisha faltered, Ayaka would remind her, restraint is not weakness. It is preparation. The bond between them deepened, not just as mentor and protege, but as women who understood invisibility. Ayaka had endured years of being underestimated in Western markets, her brilliance hidden beneath assumptions about her culture and gender. Keisha had endured years of being overlooked in her own city, her intelligence obscured by a uniform and skin that others judged before words. Together, they built not only strategies but a language of respect that transcended their differences. Valoric, meanwhile, collapsed under the weight of its scandal. Marcus disappeared from public life, his name synonymous with hubris. Philip attempted to salvage his reputation but found doors closed to him, his arrogance remembered longer than his achievements. Their downfall was studied in business schools as a cautionary tale. Never underestimate quiet strength, never assume silence means ignorance, and never mock what you do not understand. Months later, Ayaka and Keisha stood together at an international summit in Kyoto, addressing a room of global innovators. Cameras flashed as Ayaka delivered her keynote speech in English, clear and confident, with Keisha at her side as strategic advisor. The audience listened in rapt silence as Ayaka spoke not only of technology but of dignity, of the importance of listening to voices ignored by power. She ended her speech with words that would echo across industries. True innovation does not begin in the boardroom. It begins when those unheard are finally allowed to speak. The applause was thunderous. Keisha felt her heart swell, realizing she was no longer on the sidelines of history, but part of its shaping. She glanced at Ayaka, who gave her a nod so slight it was almost imperceptible, but in that nod lay recognition, trust, and something even deeper, a reminder that the invisible can indeed rewrite the ending. And so, from a single dinner filled with prejudice and arrogance, a new chapter began, one of resilience, courage, and unexpected alliances. Ayaka remained the unshakable strategist, but now the world also knew Keisha, the woman who spoke when silence had become unbearable. Together, they had proven that true power is not always obvious, and that those underestimated often hold the keys to transformation. Moral lesson: power is not always in the loudest voice or the sharpest suit. It often rests in the hands of those overlooked. Ayaka's resilience and Keisha's courage remind us that dignity must be protected, even when silence tempts us. Prejudice may be dismissed, arrogance may mock, but truth spoken at the right moment can turn the tide. If you've ever felt invisible, let this story remind you. Invisibility is not the end of your story. It may be the beginning of your power. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, subscribe, share with friends, and comment on the lessons you've learned.